and Louis Safa. And when I was going through the abstract, I found a linkage between their papers. The linkage was that the masculinities are not only multiple, but they change over time. And the transformations or the changes in masculinity happen at the intersection, often, not always, but often at the intersection of tradition and modernity. When they come together, tradition and modernity, that can lead to a lot of social traumas and a lot of problems, but that can also open possibilities for change. And they are talking about what kind of interventions we can do, when those possibilities open, and what kind of changes we can bring in terms of masculinity in order to bring a greater gender justice in the society. So this is the kind of general thematic of the thing. As I said, there are 4 presenters. I would like to introduce you Amar Rashid. Amar is from Pakistan. He's an independent researcher, lecturer, and developmental practitioner who has worked on the issues of political economy, populism, social movements, gender, local government and education, among others. Amar Rashid is also Information Secretary for the Islamabad chapter of Awami Workers Party, as well as activist with All Party Alliance for Kathiawadi, about which Kathiawadi movement he will be talking about. And then we have Julie Bradford. Julie is she was a country manager for Safer World, Nepal, and now she's a conflict and security advisor with focus on gender. And she has worked with a number of NGOs in Europe, in Central Asia, and South Sudan. And then we have Sashish. Sashish is a master's level student of development studies in University of Dhaka, and is engaged with the issues of men and masculinity. And he's also a research assistant in the Center for Men and Masculinity. And then we have finally Nouri Safa. Nouri has been working as a sector specialist in the Gender and Justice Division program of BRAC. She has been part of various research projects, and currently she is conducting a research titled Assisting the Impact of Developmental Intervention on Women's Position in the Gender Power Relation. Nouri completed her BSS and MSS degree from the Department of Women and Gender Studies, University of Dhaka. So that's it. And without further delay, Amar, the floor is yours. And all the speakers get at the maximum of 15 minutes. I'll be reminding you after 12 minutes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Amar Rashid, and I am an activist for the All Pakistan Alliance for Kathiawadi and the Awami Workers Party. And my paper today basically focuses on the question of honor as it relates to masculinity, and specifically how honor is shaped by modern informal urban existence and the practicalities involved with the materialist collective struggle for housing rights under a progressive political front. But before we begin, I'd like to make some clarifications about the nature of our work and my position within it. So I do not come, unlike many organizations here, from an organization that works explicitly with masculinities. As I said, I work with the All Pakistan Alliance for Kathiawadi, which is essentially a network of slum dwellers that was created around 15 years ago to protect the rights of Kathiawadis, or informal settlements in Pakistan, and to provide them with a collective voice in which they can address their concerns and find a space in public decision making about their lives. And the All Pakistan Kathiawadi Alliance is organized by the Awami Workers Party, which is a new party of the left in Pakistan, and which is created by a merger of other smaller left-wing parties, and at the helm of which are a group of activists and academics who've been working, and labor and peasant leaders who've been working on working class issues for much of their lives. And in order to further make my position clear, I should clarify that the research I'm presenting today is not a product of the organization per se. I'm doing this along with this is research that I've done along with my wife and comrade Jacqueline, and both in our capacity as researchers and lecturers at the Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, in the Gender Studies department there. So just to clarify exactly what it is that we're presenting, this is not necessarily an organizational product. And finally, to make clear about the nature of the alliance, the Kachhi Abadi Alliance, that this is a non-funded organization, essentially that is self-funded, whose members, including myself, work on a voluntary basis. And most people involved as activists in the alliance are motivated more by ideational and ideological commitments rather than any sense of monetary remuneration. And the alliance's activities are funded largely by membership dues of people in the alliance and by the funds of the Awami Workers' Party as well as occasional fundraising activities that we carry out for specific work that we are engaged in. So now that we're clear, so this research essentially is just a brief idea about the method that we use. So this is based on participant observation as an activist involved with the work of the alliance. So it draws on my experiences and our experiences in that work. But in addition to that, we did also interviews and focus group discussions with men and women from the particular community that we are going to be discussing here, and as well as data analysis from a data set that was done in the same community regarding risks and vulnerabilities as perceived by people living there. So just a brief outline of our approach in terms of the Kachhi Abadi Alliance. So the Kachhi Abadi Alliance doesn't explicitly work with masculinities, but in Pakistan, given the incredibly patriarchal superstructure of politics, it is inevitable that you engage with men and masculinities. It's everywhere. It's deeply saturated with it. And our methodological focus, in a sense, is somewhat the opposite of what many organizations that are here try to do. We try to explicitly work with women and try and engage them in the process of what we're trying to do. And in the process of our work, we encounter patriarchy and masculinities on an everyday basis in the communities and outside the communities that we work with. And our continual effort in tackling it is to extend our focus beyond simply the fight for housing and civic needs to larger embedded issues of structural class and gender inequality. So in terms of the actual work of the Alliance, well, one of the primary things that we work on is consciousness raising and rights awareness amongst different Kachhi Abadi communities, which involves social, political, legal education, dialogues, and like in terms of in the form of public meetings, corner meetings with various slum-dwelling communities, which takes the form of dialogic engagement and dissemination of information about government policies, past and present, which many people are very unaware of. Furthermore, we try to strengthen forms of community organization within the Abadis, including the ones that exist, but also new forms, and with an emphasis on inclusive forms of organization that have representation from both men and women, that have that cross ethnic, gender, and religious lines, and also that involve young people as well. And in the process, we try to foster collaboration between the residents of Kachhi Abadis and civil society, students, academics, and the labor movement in the country, as well as the organized landless from more rural parts of the country. Furthermore, we help the Kachhi Abadi residents with communication, with helping them get their messages across to the wider public, how they feel about their lives, how they feel about their particular position within society, and also helping them with internal communication about communication between different Kachhi Abadis that exist within our network, so they can better coordinate their activities. And finally, we help them in lobbying for decision-making influence at local and national levels. So in Pakistan, where the structure of the state is fundamentally very undemocratic, I mean, while there is nominal democracy, at the local level there is very little actual public decision-making in matters of political and public importance. Like just as an example, the authority that runs the capital city of Islamabad, the Capital Development Authority, is essentially a bureaucratic institution with no public representation or elected representation. So essentially our work also involves a push for local government institutions, because we feel that the rights of the working poor can only sort of be protected if they have if they have a say in decisions that are made about their lives. So, and one of the critical things that the organization did at its inception, close to its inception, was it got a stake in the construction of the National Housing Policy in 2001, which was one of those rare moments in Pakistan when citizens were actually asked to contribute to the formulation of public policy. And I mean, that housing policy has still helped us in our struggles over the remaining years. So the settlement that I'll be focusing on particularly today is one of the many Kachhi Abadi communities that we work with in Islamabad, and it is known as the Afghan Abadi by state authorities. and more as Benazir colony by its residents. So there's a conflict even over the naming of the Abadi, and the state's naming of it as the Afghan Abadi is to basically put a sense of that they're outsiders, that they're not from this country, that they're not from Pakistan, whereas the vast majority, like over 95% of the people, are actually from Pakistan, and the vast majority is also Pashtun, which come from the northwest of Pakistan, and they're working class, and most of them are engaged in informal contract labor in the surrounding areas. So just a bit of background about the communities that we're talking about that live in this particular Kachhi Abadi. So the Pakhtuns, for those of you who don't know, are an ethno-linguistic group that hail primarily from Pakistan and Afghanistan. They have a total population of around 50 million, around 70% of which lives in Pakistan. And the Pakhtuns are possibly distinct in that they managed to maintain a particularly distinct cultural identity over almost 5,000 years. And I mean, obviously, there's a number of variations and dynamics within that identity, but what's common and why it can be sort of studied in a particular way is because of the idea of Pakhtun Wali, which is basically like a Pakhtun code of life that many Pakhtuns still continue to adhere by. And this is pre-Islamic, and those Pakhtuns are predominantly Muslim now, but the Pakhtun Wali is a pre-Islamic code that has been modified over time in many ways. So the idea of the Pakhtun Wali is basically a traditional code of honor, which refers to the traditional lifestyle of Pakhtun folk, including men, women, all young and old. It includes unwritten codes of honor that basically control, guide, and balance the character and discipline of Pakhtun life. And it's transmitted from generation to generation, usually in the form of orally. There's no written form of this tradition, and it's generally seen as something that all Pakhtuns must adhere to, that they must live by, and it's very closely tied to the question of honor, which is referred to as Nang in Pashto. And but at the same time, while we can study Pakhtun Wali and we can see it as an important social reference, it's important at this point that I might say that it's important to refrain from cultural essentializations or generalizations when one is discussing this concept, that it shouldn't be seen as something static that is simply something that everyone just adheres to. I mean, while many Pakhtuns do indeed profess an adherence to Pakhtun Wali, it is not by any means an exhaustive account of the motivations of Pakhtun people, but it's simply a useful frame of reference to imagine the evolution of particular social institutions over time. And as pointed out by some authors, the Pakhtun code of life has been shaped by the result of the historical dialectical relationship with Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and other creeds that Pakhtuns have interacted with as they've existed on the crossroads of Central Asia. So that's also we kept in mind. So Pakhtun Wali is obviously a very exhaustive code of life. It includes like behavioral norms for different modes of existence. But what I'm going to focus on particularly is the idea of honor, and which is very integral to Pakhtun Wali, and it relates particularly closely with Pakhtun masculinity as well. So just as a quote from this Khushal Khan Khattak, a very prominent Pakhtun poet, that to me honor is far better than life if mere living is not with respect and honor. And this is something that many Pakhtuns would agree with, and this is something we've heard several times in our interactions, that the life without honor is not a life worth living. But what is honor? I mean, there's many definitions of it, and so, but it's related to protection, the protection of family and your clan. It has to do with bravery and the capacity to face challenges, all kinds of economic, material challenges that exist, and it's often directly associated with the control and segregation of women, who are seen as repositories of honor. And the loss of honor again is regarded as shame, and it's associated with sharam, and which can result in taunts. So there's this very stark realization about that there's a stark sense of saving face that many Pakhtuns feel. So just in recent decades, like there's Pakhtuns, if you can talk about a common Pakhtun experience, it's been characterized by large-scale conflict in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Thousands of Pakhtuns have died and millions have been displaced over two major wars in the 1980s and 2000s that most of you are probably aware of. There's been large-scale international migration and to urban areas across the country, and the Pakhtuns have also been subject to large-scale disasters, in the earthquake in Pakistan in 2005 and the floods in 2010 causing further displacement of millions. And furthermore, they've faced this relentless stereotyping and demonization, and in Pakistan particularly, where they're seen as savages, illiterate, they're seen as the repositories of Islamic fundamentalism, misogyny, and they've also been subject to abuse by the state in the name of fighting terror, which, I mean, a lot of questions can be asked about Pakistani state's actual resolve to fight terror. But Pakhtuns have served as cannon fodder in many ways in the war on terror, and they've been displaced and over again on various pretexts in a war that simply doesn't end. And furthermore, the majority of Pakhtuns have increasingly moved from subsistence and capitalist agriculture to engagement in informal, precarious urban labor. So what we have seen as a result of this, according to many studies and observations, is that there's rising political and religious conservatism amongst Pakhtuns as a whole. You can see this in terms of their political and religious choices. There's an increasing maintenance of parda and strict gender segregation that is increasingly visible in society. There's also a rise in gender-based violence across Pakhtun communities in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and different other parts of the country. And there have been increases in education, including women's education. Literacy has increased, but still women's mobility and political participation has actually diminished from earlier times. And this can be juxtaposed, understood with respect to the fact that in the 50s, 60s, in the mid-20th century, the main Pakhtun movement was the Khudai Khidmatgars of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who was known as the Frontier Gandhi, which was a non-violent, peaceful movement for justice, which was seen as progressive in many ways, which was actually against the religious character of the Pakistani state as well. And now what you see is pervasive religious militancy in the form of various groups such as the Taliban that find their place in Pakhtun society. So as a sum of all of these, in our interviews returning back to the Abadi, we find that many Pakhtuns feel that traditional modes of existence are threatened. They feel threatened by it. And particularly with respect to Nang, they feel that their honor is threatened by relentless displacement, homelessness, poverty, and also because of interaction with other ethnic and class formations.
Your time is up. Can you just wrap up here?
Okay, can you give me 2 more minutes?
1 minute.
Okay. So, and what we find is that there is an expression of collective doubt that's commonly heard amongst Pakhtuns, that they themselves are naturally violent, savage, and stupid, and they find that there's a greater need to cloak their vulnerability, and which often comes out in the form of greater control over women. And women themselves report how intra-household conflict is increasing as men are deeply troubled by the various class issues they face and because of violence by the state. So, with respect to particular urban struggle, so our work with this community was in response to a large-scale eviction drive by city authority in Islamabad in early 2014, and our approach was essentially and this is what I want to talk about, it involved large-scale mobilization across ethnic and religious lines. So we had that as a forefront of our ideological approach, and we elicited the active political participation of women, including women in leadership positions, and we tried to link various forms of oppression in our discourse and in our various community sessions with the communities. And also we tried to subvert and instrumentalize the idea of honor and contest it, and demonstrate the regressiveness, the absurdity of regressive ideas of honor that confine women to the homes, like asking the question about what's the point of honor when you won't have a home anymore, and what's the point of keeping women in the home when they won't even have a roof over their heads. So the idea was to get women out, to get them involved in politics, get them involved in the public sphere. And we saw a massive public response. In response to this, just quickly, some of the images from this, I'll go over them briefly because they're done. So basically, so what we see in amongst the Pakhtun communities is, after we interviewed them, they spoke of how their honor was integral to the urban struggle. Like, over this long process of struggle, they said that their honor was a shield for them to protect themselves and their communities. And further, many of them even spoke of it in terms of religious references, in terms of how if the Prophet's wife could enter the battlefield, then why could women not struggle for their rights, which marked a decisive shift from how they used to view these ideas earlier. So the process of urban struggle had a demonstrative effect in terms of the importance of egalitarian collective action. Honor became integral to the struggle. Women's participation particularly, and even leadership, was practically and discursively accepted by many in the communities, and hence seen as integral to honor. And there was a growing discourse of egalitarianism and gender equality that we see. However, of course, there continues to be a long way to go, and this is not necessarily just a perfect equilibrium. So just in the conclusion, we just need to acknowledge that hegemonic masculinities are shaped by political economy, by war, by conflict, by displacement, dispossession that occurs within capitalist modes of production, and rising conservatism and misogyny in contemporary Pakhtun society is closely linked to this. And informality and precariousness, which is also an increasing characteristics of modern political economy, is also integral to perceptions of threats and defensiveness about honor that's felt by Pakhtuns. And finally, the possibility of a class-based politics tackling structural inequality opens spaces for engagement on issues of gender. So in terms of the implications that we have for gender politics, this is the last slide, that we need to understand masculinity in the context of modernity, capitalism, conflict, the state, and contemporary class formations, that we need to move beyond seeing this simply as tradition, that is static tradition against modernity. It is tradition that is changing, that is being shaped by contemporary context, and there is a need to engage in a grassroots politics that constantly illuminates the relationship between various forms of oppression that can be effective. And there is a need to, again, use and engage with and redefine popular idioms of traditional identity, such as Nang, honor, rather than merely engage in antagonism towards it, but is often the approach of many gender activists in Pakistan. Not that I'm criticizing it necessarily, we also need that of opposition, but at the same time we also need engagement. And finally, we need to recognize that capitalism and patriarchy are inextricably linked, and to encounter systemic marginalization, we must address both forms of oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Amar. I thought those are extremely well-argued papers in which he talks about something we started with, how masculinity change at the intersection of modernity and tradition. With this community coming to Pakhtun, with their ancient codes of masculinity, Pakhtun, and coming to an urban space and trying to, find a kind of a new existence here and carrying out this movement. So, thank you, Amar. I hope there will be a lot of discussions regarding this later. Our second presenter today is Julie, and it's over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie. I'm with Safe for World, which is an organization based in the UK, but with country programs in different parts of this world, working to prevent conflict and build safer lives. I would like to continue our journey through South Asia and take you to Nepal, where we did a study, which, like the title is, How Can You Be a Marda, which is a Nepali word for man, but with specific a specific taste. If you beat your wife, and there are reports available for you. Nepal is a country that came out of conflict in 2006. There are still a lot of challenges politically, economically, but overall, compared to a lot of other post-conflict countries, it's actually fairly safe and secure, with one big exception, which is sexual and gender-based violence, which is very rampant in the country, and there are different studies and different percentages of how many women are affected by sexual and gender-based violence in their lifetime. It's very, very high. There are quite a lot of studies around gender-based violence. There are quite a lot of studies around the situation of women in conflict and post-conflict context of Nepal, but fairly little work has been done on men and masculinities and their role in conflict dynamics, their role in gender dynamics and related to violence. We wanted to look at that a little bit more closely, and we started a project that had a large research component in 2013 and 14, together with 3 partners and funded by the Foundation to Promote Open Society, that had 3 key objectives. On the one hand, to explore notions of masculinities in 2 selected districts of eastern Nepal, then also to understand young men's experiences and attitudes towards violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, but then also to provide room for reflection and learning together with these young men that we were working with. And we were also working with young women and other community members, but to a lesser extent. Very briefly on the methodology, so it was qualitative research. We used participatory learning and reflection tools that don't only extract information but also provide an opportunity for learning and providing information on violence and on gender to the young men we were working with. The main target group, as I said, were young men aged 16 to 25 from 2 selected districts, but we also had focus group discussions with young women, with older community members. We talked to sexual and gender minorities, representatives from government institutions, and then there was an outreach component that the young man basically initiated to talk a little bit more about the changes that they would like to see in their own behavior and the behavior and attitudes of the wider community. So you see very small, the two districts that we were looking at. These are the focus areas of the research. So on the one hand, we looked at defining aspects of masculinity as the young men and the community members identified them. We looked at physical appearance, we looked at behavior, we looked at the role of families, at education and work, and at migration. We also talked a lot with the young men about gender, so particularly about like how they see the changing gender roles that they are witnessing, but also their relationship to others in their lives, whether those are other men, whether those are men who might not meet these hegemonic expectations, like for example men with disabilities or sexual and gender minorities, and their relationship towards women, so both adult women and younger women. And thirdly, we talked about violence, their experiences of violence and their attitudes towards violence, and both non-physical and physical violence. And I guess most of the participants had experienced violence of some form in their lifetime, and they were still quite young. In terms of physical violence, what came out most strongly was sexual harassment, but also violence between young men, so fighting. And then we looked at the role of women in violence. So on the one hand, their role as survivors of violence, but also their roles as committing violence and as also perpetuating structures that permit violence, including sexual and gender-based violence. We don't have the time to look at all those aspects, so I will focus on migration, but very happy to talk about the other aspects in the discussion or later in the breaks. So just some selected findings. We found that, unsurprisingly, the contextual challenges make it very difficult for young men to meet the demands of society, the expectations of society, but also to fulfill their own dreams, the way they want to live their lives. There's a constant need to renegotiate masculinities and how they are seen as men. So on the one hand, in terms of how they look, how they are perceived by others. So a lot of them wanted to look really tough, wearing rough clothes, looking like dons, like criminals, because that would give them respect from their peers. They wanted to show bravery, courage, and take risks, because that was perceived as specifically male. At the same time, there are also strong social, I guess the communities don't like people drinking too much alcohol or taking drugs, so there was that issue about risk. Their economic role as breadwinner and provider for their family, so that was seen as one key responsibility for a real man. Needs to be able to sustain his family and to take care of the parents, particularly when they are aging, because in Nepal, sons, usually parents live in the houses of one of their sons. Then the social role as head of the family, who's in charge of the family, who is making decisions, but who's also taking a strong controlling role, particularly over the children and his wife. And then who's protecting the family's honor or ijat. So I think that's similar to what you just described as, I think, Nang? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a ritual role that men have, to be a son, to be the heir and who continues the family and who carries out religious ceremonies. One finding was that, which is not surprising, I guess, after all the discussions we had, that violence was not identified as an attribute of being a man. A lot of the young men actually said that they don't like violence, but it was frequently experienced, practiced, and accepted. So these attributes of masculinity, or in Nepali, Jimewari, they were seen as what constitutes a man, a marda, a real man. At the same time, there were a lot of factors which then made a man unmanly or namarda. And these are very closely linked to the developments that are happening in Nepal at the moment, particularly regarding unemployment, regarding women's empowerment. So there are a lot of strong women's organizations, women rights organizations, a lot of women empowerment programs. And so gender relationships are changing to some extent, but there are a lot of frictions between those opportunities and how it plays out in reality. So a lot of the young men said that they're actually really open to gender equality in their own relationships. And a lot of them said, for example, that they would like their wives to go and work and bring home a salary, because in times where unemployment is rare, it's actually good to have two people contributing to the family income. But they were really, like they knew, or they had a strong feeling that they would be ridiculed by their society, by the parents-in-law, who would see them as not manly if a wife had to contribute to family income. There was also a strong lack of role models. That they identified actually gender inequality as social violence, which is quite interesting. There was a lack of role models that could show young men what it is like to live in a relation where man and husband and wife have equal rights. Similarly, related to sexual and gender minorities, there were no role models really for young men to look up to. So that was very much seen as an area, like, there wasn't that much aggression towards sexual and gender minorities, but definitely something they wanted to stay away from them. And the sexual and gender minorities actually mentioned that they do face a lot of violence. So young men are trying to find new ways of asserting their masculinities. And two ways are, for example, joining political or criminal groups, and then migrating to other countries for work. And migration is it's big in Nepal. So I think every year thousands of people migrate either to India or to the Gulf countries particularly. And most of those are men. There are some women migrating, and they face different challenges, which would be an interesting research topic in itself. So it has become a way for men to meet social expectations or to escape social expectations and limitations and restrictions. For example, to get married at an early age. Some men said, like, oh, I'd rather migrate before and then get married later. So some of them get married just before they're leaving, so bad luck for them. It's increasingly seen as almost like a rite of passage to leave the country for some time. And it brings advantages, which is why young men are leaving. So it's an opportunity to earn money, to escape poverty, and it increases confidence and improves the social status. A lot of young men, when they come back, when they can build a house for their families, or they have like fancy gadgets that they bought with the money, that's improving their social status. They gain new skills, or they hope to do so. Not all of them do. It's an opportunity to see the world, to get exposure to other countries. I've been out there. I don't know more than just my village. And it's a way to escape social restrictions and control. But it is also a huge challenge, including regarding gender relations. So there's a big risk of failure and indebtedness. When young men, or when anyone who wants to migrate, they need a lot of money to get a passport, a visa, ticket to the other country, and they usually have to take loans. And a lot of them don't succeed financially abroad. The money, they're just not paid, or they're paid very little. The money is stolen. And then they come home and the debts are very high, and so they're worse off than they were before. And that has huge implications for their families. A lot of young men leave school early because they feel that school is not preparing them for life. They will not find a job with what they learn at school, so why not just leave school early and go to work instead? You might have heard, like it was big in the news, that the living conditions, particularly in Gulf countries, are often very bad for migrant workers. A lot of people die each year. They're mistreated. They're physically abused. So they face a lot of very high risks. And there's a lot of illegal migration to those countries. A lot of them get involved in gambling and prostitution and drinking, and all that has big implications for family relationships. So we see that a lot of families disintegrate as a result of that. So there's not good communication between the husband who is abroad and the family at home. There's high levels of mistrust against wives of migrants. So it's seen almost as a given that a wife whose husband is abroad will have an extramarital affair, whether that's the case or not. But that means that the husband is very alert, because that again diminishes his honor and the honor of his family. So they've used new ways of controlling their wives, like for example calling them constantly on the phone. If the wife doesn't pick up the phone, that's a sign she must have an affair at the moment. The wives who are often living with their parents-in-laws, they are often dominated by them, and they face domestic violence at the hands of the parents-in-laws, often also sexual abuse by relatives. And when the husband comes home, there are often fights between husbands and wives. So a lot of those social pressures to earn money, it's a pull factor. But at the same time, these big risks of individual vulnerability, but also implications for the family, they somehow have to be balanced. So at the moment, a lot of men take that risk. They take the decision. Some of them, related to the last 2 points on family disintegration and domestic violence, some of them then decide that actually they move away with their wife from their home family. So they start a new household, which then has implications for generational relationships, what's happening to their aging parents, who's taking care of them. So some of them try to find a way out. But so there are different push and pull factors for young men to actually meet expectations. And these have implications for the families, but also for society at large, because they see, if someone sees, okay, that person left, came home, has been successful, now has a nice house, we'll send our sons as well, or I'll leave as well. But one last point is, I guess, I think particularly the individual risk for men to be physically abused is very much against what they see as how a man should be treated. Same involvement in gambling, prostitution, and drinking is not seen as something that a man should be doing. Beating their wife is not seen as something that men would like to do. So there are those contradictions between expectations and reality. I'm not sure if you want to talk about recommendations, because I think we talked about them in other sessions as well. I guess what might be more relevant is to ask a couple of questions: what migration means in the longer term for a society. So how do men who have gone through traumatic experiences of physical violence, of verbal abuse, of being particularly in Gulf countries, being at the bottom of the chain, what does that do to them, and how does that play out when they return to their families, to their society? What does it mean for family relationships in general, relationships between parents and children, between father and children? Who's the role model for the child if the father is away? Then generational challenges. At the same time, there might be positive aspects of what does it mean, if they come home and if they are successful. Does that mean if they have higher levels of income that actually the family will be better off, and gender equality will be improved? So a lot of questions to follow up on and to think through. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I think this paper brings up a number of issues concerning Nepali masculinity. This question of who is marda and who is na-marda, this is articulated in different ways in different locations. And there is a kind of emotional charge to many people as to who is marda and who is na-marda. And in the modern context, wherein the masculinity is often associated with how much money you make or what kind of job you have. If you don't have a job, you become a na-marda. And then migration, going to another country outside the nation to seek for employment or work, that is a way to regain your masculinity, but that can lead to its own kind of trauma, that Julie has said. So thank you, Julie. It's wonderful listening to you. Our next presenter is Sashish Kamal. Please.
Hello everyone. My name is Sashish Kamal, and I'm doing my Masters in Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, and the presentation I'm going to give is on my undergrad thesis, and it was also funded by Center for Men and Masculinity Studies, and I'm also doing my working there as a research assistant. So I'm going to basically talk about how masculinity is transformed, how masculinity is governed, and how various practices of young men relates with the harm of children, women, and young men themselves. So we are going to cover these contents: the background, analytical framework, methodology and methods, objectives, exploring the practices of young men in relation to gender-based violence, and we'll finish it up with the conclusion. So the background of the study includes another study of Human Development Resource Center in 2013, which said that 76% of tertiary level female students have been the victim of sexual harassment in Bangladesh. And the main perpetrators were other tertiary level male students from other classes and male students of victims' own classes. And this sexual harassment is a part of the overarching gender-based violence that I'm talking about. And this gave me the vital reason of conducting this study. And I chose Dhaka University as my research research area, and the male students of Dhaka University as my research subject. So this is the analytical framework I'm going to use, that masculinity is the configuration of practices mainly, and how I have identified various practices and how those practices actually relate with behaviors categorized as violence. So this is an exploratory study. That means I'm going to identify and explore the practices, and it has been used following our interpretive paradigm. Respondents and methods of data collection. I've used 3 FGDs, and I've took 15 male students of Dhaka University for in-depth interview, and 5 of them I used life history analysis. And I took a small sample survey of 100 male students, but this should be said that these sample surveys should not be used for making inferences or generalization. Rather, it should be used as a complementary data along with the qualitative findings. And all throughout the research, I've used participant observation. I've used purposive snowball and stratified sampling, stratified random sampling, and there's something to say about the respondents' characteristics. I mean, the Dhaka University is a public university, and it is dominated by students of middle class, lower middle class, and poor families. And this is the objective, that means exploring the construction of dominant masculinity among young men in Dhaka University and its relation with enactment of gender-based violence. And the sub-objectives are exploring the social practices enacted upon the young men in relation to gender-based violence. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the issue of unemployment, and it is known as the practice of bekar chele, means unemployment man. Boys usually grow into men, and they grow into men with a governance by their family and the other institutions in the society. So what kind of men do the government, with the governance and the family want them to be? They want men to be members of the family who can provide, who can have higher income, and who can have a lot of power. So you can see that this is one of the quotes that I have provided. If you want to be a respected man in your family, you must be employed. So it shows that employment that was earlier talked about is an issue of the men in Dhaka University. And there is another quote I have provided, that how the level of unemployment can actually create mental traumas and suffering for the men. And as a reward of being able to provide, being able to have higher income, and being able to have a lot of power, they think that women is a kind of reward of that kind of ability to provide. So this quote actually shows that in Bangladesh, power is everything. If you have power, you can get anything. You can get money, cars, houses. Of course, you will get a lot of women too. You know, Mr. MP X and Mr. MP Y. How can men like those get that kind of wives? It's power and money, my friend. If you have power and money, you have everything. So we can see that that they're thinking that the reward of being employed, being able to provide, is women. So we can see also that boys don't automatically become men who can provide. They need to be governed. They need to be ruled, and there has to be some reward and punishment system so that they can become a man that is desired by the society. And such a practice is shashon. That means to govern. Here we can see that how a child is actually justifying his childhood punishment by his father. He said that one time I went to play instead of studying. He did not always beat me, but when he did, oh my God, he would almost kill me. I felt very bad that time. One time I decided to leave home but couldn't implement the plan. But now I realize that it was important to shashon, to govern me. I would do it to my son also. So here we can see that the physical punishment by the parents is justified, and the sample survey shows that 80% of the students were beaten or insulted or given physical punishment by their parents in their childhood. So the difference is shashon or the governance is quite different from men and women. Shashon related with sexuality, actually the woman has to bear that burden of sexuality. Here's a story where there was an affair between a boy and a girl, and the teacher of the coaching center found out that relationship, and the teacher told the mother of that girl, and eventually the girl was married off, and she could not give her exam that year, but the parents of the boys did not even know the incident. This is another governing technique named shasti or punishment. This is usually provided in the educational arena, and we can see that respondents identified punishments like holding ears, standing up on the bench, usually holding ears, and beating with hard stick or wooden rulers. And there are other punishments that have been provided, and it is found that men or the boys are given more punishment than the girls. And boys are able, because one said that boys are able to handle the punishment. And we can see that 93% of the boys were beaten, insulted, or given physical punishment to the school, college, coaching center by their teachers. And we can see that in the school level, it highly prevails. It declines in the college level and non-existent in the university level. So this is another practice done by young men, that is the categorization of young men. They categorize girls based on their subjective interpretation, and the two categories may involve bhalome, meaning good girl, and the second category involves women who are regarded as bajame, or also called faltume, meaning cheap girls. So this categorization is completely based on intuition and subjective preference, because if you read this conversation, you will study, you can see that how the preferences shape the categorization. Okay. So we can see that though this is completely based on subjective preferences, but there are also some key features that helps the young men to determine the features of the categorization. They use their dresses, they use their body language and eye contact to categorize the girls into various categories. So in the globalized world, the women who enjoy a lot of freedom, who engage in public arena, who engage in jobs, actually by default are categorized as a bad girl or the bajame category. So you can see this quotation, which actually says that they want everyone to see what they've got. What's wrong when boys do something messy with them? Girls nowadays are master at making your head spin. You are a man, you will understand this. If you don't, you have a problem, my friend. So we can see that in a globalized world, when women there's a transformation going on in the overall society, the women who are enjoying more personal freedom are by default categorized as something degrading by the young men. and they are justifying rape, they are justifying violence against them as a thing that they should do. And this is another practice by young men. And if you see the last line, it says that this shows that if a man is persistent, then he will eventually get he wants. That means continuously following a girl, even she likes or don't like it, is considered to be a part of masculinity. Having fun, a group of friends, what they do usually through a mobile or other things, they continuously pursue a woman, and this also is considered to be a part of their masculinity. A man is expected to have control over the woman, and as this quote says, that there are some men who do not have any control over their girlfriends. He is a spineless man. No one listens to him. They tell their girls to mix with other boys, go everywhere. Soon the girl leaves the man himself. So man is considered to have control over the girlfriend or wife. This often results in restriction of women going to university tours, picnics, not being allowed to have male friends, less mobility, time-bound mobility, and other things. And this is the last slide, that is the last practice, that is the Shikha Daur, means teaching a lesson. When when a girl actually rejects a man, it is considered to be a disgrace for the man, and they try to take action or take revenge or punishment to the woman, and this is also considered to be a part of the man. And this case study explains that practice. So, in conclusion, I will say that young men's masculinity is governed initially in childhood by the institution of family and schools. These institutions aims to shape a boy into a man who can get a good job, secure high income for himself and family. Deviation from the path is considered to be bad for the boy, thus making physical and mental punishment justified. Strict governance, punishment, shame, and reward prevails for education, employment, and income opportunities for young men. Women are considered to be the reward of dominant masculinity. Heterosexuality is usually taken for granted. Heterosexual behaviors being persistent to attract women are perceived as a sign of virility and masculinity among young men. The feelings and consent of women is of little importance. Young men categorizes women into good girl, bad girl dichotomy based on the assumption that they have the right to do that as a man, and their analysis is perfect. A perceived bad girl is considered to be the object of fun and sex. There is tendency among young men to consider the women who have considerable personal and sexual freedom to be a bad or cheap girl, thus making rape and harassment justifiable. And as I've said, the revenge is an essential part of masculinity. It can be against both men and women. Especially in the case of women rejecting young men, the young men consider it as a disgrace to their masculinity. Thus, taking any action against the woman can reattach him with his lost masculinity. And in the end, the policymakers should actually focus on the practices that stems from the masculinity rather than only focusing on the never-ending list of criminal violent acts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satish. I saw a lot of linkages between this paper and the ones that were presented earlier, especially the question of what it means to be a marda or a real man, and what are the rituals of masculinity. That's what found very interesting in that. Judith Butler, in one of her books, she has argued that femininity is a matter of following a certain rituals of being a woman, but masculinity has similar rituals. Maja karna or follow, stalking, etc., etc. These are all parts of the rituals. If you keep on repeating those rituals, that creates certain variety of masculinity. So thank you so much, Sashish. And then I would like to invite our last speaker, Nouri Safar. Floor is yours, Nouri.
Hello everyone, I hope you are not yet tired. So welcome to my presentation. Okay, so as you can see, the title of my presentation is
Development Intervention and Masculinities in Transition. This is a study which was conducted among indigenous Marma men, those are living in Bandarbashadar in Chittagong Hill Tracts. It is to be mentioned that Marma is the second largest indigenous community in Bangladesh, and they are living in the southeast of Bangladesh. So before I start, I think it is important to review and give you a brief about the background. Development intervention in Chittagong Hill Tracts is definitely not a new phenomenon, because from the British period miniature development took place. But this place becomes a site of wide range of development intervention after Liberation War in 1971. After Liberation War, then government of Bangladesh took different kinds of interventions, among which Bengali settlement programs was one of the main. So what happened? Before full-fledged development intervention, indigenous people in that community used to live on, shifting trades, subsistence-based economy. But after development intervention, there is a massive change. Massive change. Why this is happening? This is the question. Because of the multiculturalism impact. Because when development intervention becomes so intense in this area, more Bengali people started coming in this area. So because of their superior tax as Bangladeshi and Bengali, as well as their tendency related to profit orientation, make them more powerful. So the rationale of my study was to keep pace with the wave of modernization or filling increased gap with Bengali settlers. Many indigenous people may have moved on from their primitive way of living, as the existing situation is constantly forcing them to grow up with competitive mind for the survival purpose. So a shift in masculine attributes might have raised in such condition in Chittagong Hill Tracts, which should have brought under study for assuming future social, economical and political picture of Chittagong Hill Tracts. So if you see the objective of my study, the broader objective is to understand, as a result of development intervention in Chittagong Hill Tracts, whether shifts in masculinities take place among three generations indigenous Marma men. And specific objectives were to trace out impact of development intervention on construction of masculinities among Marma men, to trace out whether multiculturalism, which is a cause of development intervention, is resulting shift in gender relationship in indigenous Marma community. So if you just look at the methodology, this is a simple way, that I applied qualitative methodology and data collection tool. I used in-depth interview as well as focus group discussion. Sampling method was perceived and snowball sampling. And I covered the Bandaban Shodor. Shodor means the city area, the main area, not the remote area. And I emphasized on the Balaghat and Tigerpara. As I was talking about three generations, so I divided in three generations. The first generation represents aged Marma men, age 60 plus. Second generation represents middle-aged Marma men, 40 to 59 years old. And the third generation represents young-aged Marma men, 18 to 39 years old. So I have already, you can see three focus areas. The first one, I try to understand that what is the perception among the three generations related to the development intervention. And secondly, I wanted to understand that what is their understanding about the real man construction. And then I try to understand that whether shifting masculinity is putting impact on gender relationships or not. So here the first one, the perceiving development across the three generations. So first what I did, I just tried to understand what is perceived by the first generation related to the development intervention. And interestingly, I have found that they are thinking development intervention is something that is making them very much lazy. Because they were telling me that in previous time they used to walk, that miles after miles, but nowadays they can see that the present generation cannot even, run for 2 or 3 minutes. They become so sluggish and lazy. And they think that due to this development intervention, they are about to lose their intrinsic nature, traditional culture, thoughts and beliefs. They they thought that they become more marginalized because of such intervention instead of being privileged. So there is a quotation. 90% population of this Sodor, which means the city area, in Bengal is Bengali settlers. I would suggest you to go at the main market and main bazaar in Sodor, and I can assure you the picture that you are going to be observed will compel you to reach at a conclusion to decide who is the main beneficiary of such extensive development interventions. This is none other but Bengali settlers who are blessed to occupy 95% of the trades. Because of their higher social, economical and political condition of Bengali settlers, they are more likely to grab development intervention which are assisting them to be the ultimate beneficiary of the development. And interesting, when I entered to the Sodor area, I didn't observe any indigenous people. The whole place are occupied by Bengali settlers, but when I went to the remote area, I found lots of. So what about the second generation? Second generation showed a mixed opinion. It means that at one point they are thinking that neither it benefited them nor it actually, that at one point development intervention have broadened scopes for them, and in another point this intervention have fostered the mode of competition which has been making them more marginalized. They are thinking that the previous way of living tortured them physically and the present one is now torturing them psychologically. There is a quotation. I have experienced life with and without modernity, but to be clear, none of this lifestyle was good, as the primitive one used to torture us physically and the present one has been torturing us psychologically. So the perception that come from the third generation, they think that development intervention is what that has made them civilized. They think that it has helped them to a lot to enlarge their outlook. And interestingly, most of them told me in a focus group discussion that the effect of modernization has taught them how maximum output can be generated by giving minimum input. Here is a quotation. I'm overwhelmed seeing one of my Bengali friend's father who makes big profit playing the role of mediator. Yesterday I heard from my friend that he had made a big contract with British American Tobacco, though I have doubt about his honesty, but without any hesitation he is my idol. So the third, the second one, here I try to understand their understanding about the masculinity, the real man construction, what happened to the first generation. They thought that honesty, benevolency, having strong morality, having cultural mind, these are the main thing to be a real man. That if you want to be a real man, you have to be honest. And they also emphasize on the strong physical structure as well. The second generation is somewhere in between, as like before. They think that a real man has the ability to provide full financial support to family members. Honesty and benevolency are seen to be secondary required attributes to them. What's about the third generation? They think that preferred masculine traits are rationality, ability to make strategic plans. Mind is preferred to body. They think that strong physical structure is not that important, rather than it is important to think rationally, through which you can make big profit, that inputting just. Instead of focusing on well-body structure, a man should emphasize to build up a rational and strategic mind which helps to generate profit within a short time. So how this shifting masculinity is influencing the gender relationship? Okay. According to the first generation, men and women are equal and both of them have the same ability to engage in the same types of work. Moreover, some respondents of this group think women can work more than men to some extent. Public-private dichotomy merely instigates gender-based discrimination, so they oppose the notion of this dichotomy. According to the second generation, women should not come out of private sphere as long as the male member of the family can provide full financial support to this family. Women should not engage with public life as the condition of present society cannot ensure women's security. And if you just look at the third generation, women should not come out of a home as they find them emotional beings which they think unfriendly for keeping pace with the competitive world. I think women are emotional beings, thus cannot adjust perfectly with the public sphere or merely precisely with the place that is full of competition. So what can we see? There is a transformation. Where it is leading? It is leading towards the hegemonic masculinities, and this is actually accelerating the private-public dichotomy, and definitely it is heading towards the gender-based violence. So I think that what is important when we talk about gender justice or gender equality, most of the time we do not actually emphasize on the intersectional lens. If we put emphasis on the intersectional lens, we can identify, the problem that is happening. Those are based on race, ethnicity, these kind of things. So how multiculturalism or power dynamics facilitating this kind of gender insensitivity or gender injustice that needs to be brought under, that like this. So this is my study. So here's my mail address. If anyone interested to know more about this, you can contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. This also brings up a number of issues that have been going throughout this panel. The idea that how masculinity keeps on changing across the generations, because different generations have different idea about masculinity as the demands of the time change. And one interesting thing I found here was, like as Nuri also mentioned, with the coming of modernity, the hegemonic model of masculinity is now coming into being. I mean, there is a lot of problem with tradition. Tradition is not the solution. Tradition can be very patriarchal and it can oppress women. But on the other hand, modernity might not be the cure to this, because modernity will bring its own problems. So we have to remain aware of these things. So thank you, panelists. It was excellent discussion, and the kind of things that have been put on. I'm sure that we will have some interesting questions. We can go up to, I think, 1:45 because we started 15 minutes late. That is because the last session, plenary, ended like 10-15 minutes late. So we will begin with like 3 questions, and then we'll just keep on. Yes, Kapilji, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah. I have queries, just reflections presented by Pakistani friend and then so UK friend, but based on the research in Nepal. So 2 points is that for the Pakistani friend, you are, as per your presentations, it seems that you have done a lot. In the same time, what Nepalese experience is that if you try to intervene in the community related to religious aspects, then if we bring the priest, pandit, if we convince any as a model, then they will convince their communities rather than you and me. We have got example in Nepal, Dinabandhu Pokhrel, and then those people who are from Kathmandu, Nepal, they know their contributions. So one of them, his father was killed because of this type of interventions. So you are doing this type of practice or not? If you are doing this type of practice, then I like to hear from you. Another is that about the murder, about the man. Murder, it has got several linkages, religion, there is law practices, and then maybe social practices. All those things are very much as a background. If you ask third generation, as Bengali friend was sharing, then what type of husband she likes. So it depends that new generations, they frame as per the requirements of their female partners. So in the same time, we can find out real murder as per the societal requirements and then their knowledge level. Just that if a boy or man doesn't allow to his wife to go for the job at the night, then there is another sin, So there are several aspects. Did you collect, did you consider all these elements or not during the your study?
Okay, so first we will listen to the questions. Ma'am, okay. Yeah, she wanted to. After that you will come to, and then I'll come to. Please.
Thank you very much, sir. And I really appreciate this whole symposium, as they are bringing all these young, thought-provoking persons into these sessions, and we are very lucky to listen to them. Everyone has different dimensions. I wouldn't go to any of all of those, of course.
Is your question, please?
Only two questions. One is, it's about when the migration, I think, Julie, you looked at from this masculinity perspective, what is happening to the man, and they are going abroad. But have you looked at what is happening within the household level where man is absent? So is there a new kind of leadership is developing with the women who has to manage their own family or what? So this is one question. And one question from last night continuously bugging me, and I know I'll talk about it all day today, so that's just the beginning. As you have looked into different communities around this whole aspects of masculinity, how it is hampering gender equality, have you now, we would like to hear from you after being here for 3-4 days with 93 countries, 100 countries, progressive people. How do you think we can overcome it? If you have, have you thought about anything, like one or two strategy that yes, in my situation, this will be the strategy to overcome it. I'm very interested to know.
Overcome what?
Strategies.
To
How
overcome?
to overcome the situation, the impediments is now happening in your own context. For you, it will be Pakhtun, right? For others, it will be their own.
Okay, one more question.
Namaste everyone, I am Govinda Dhol from Nepal. I think it will be better if Julie will respond to my query. She brought a good picture of Nepal. So I would like to just put one thing. I saw the gap. There is class system. Nepali society has been classified into 4 categories: Brahmin, Kshatri, Shudra and Vaishya. Shudra are the people who are supposed to be the low class people, and low class people, they don't supposed to, it means they are not allowed to marry with a girl or boy in higher class family. It means Pandit or Kshatri, other caste, means high class family, they are never allowed. And if there becomes love and affair between boys and girls from the society of lower class and higher class, so there becomes many kinds of violences, and it is also highlighted by media, from social media. So my query is whether we can put it into gender-based violence or not. So it is the violence based on political and social norms. If we keep the question into the gender-based violence, whether it will be justified or not. Okay.
So, panelists, you know the questions that are asked to you. First, would like to go.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. On the whether we considered all elements of what constitutes a man, I think it's not possible. Because the research was very focused. So we looked at what in these 2 specific locations, what people saw as kind of defining aspects of masculinity. So and that was also a topic that was new to them. I mean, usually I think maybe it's different for us because we work on it professionally, but most normal people don't reflect about masculinity and femininity on a daily basis. So I think what came out when we talked to them were more the aspects that came to mind more obviously, that were more visible. We did not and the research was very much driven by what particularly the young men we were engaging with, what they brought forward. So there are a lot of aspects. I totally agree. There are other social aspects, there are other legal aspects that play a role, but we had to limit it to some aspects. And I think interesting your point on what an ideal what people think is an ideal husband also depends to some extent to what young women want, what kind of husband they want to have. I think that is interesting because a lot of the young women actually, they also had a lot of these traditional notions of masculinity because they have also been brought up in their families in specific contexts and heard things from their parents. But while at the same time for example, a lot of them actually had higher education than the boys because the boys migrated. So, which will be an interesting thing to look at in the future, what that means for society if women have higher levels of education than men. In terms of the impact on families and on what does it mean for women actually, we looked into that a little bit. We also looked into that in another study that we did. It has quite drastic implications. When the husband is leaving, very often because they have to take a loan, the family is indebted. So, which means that until the husband sends money for the first time, if he manages to send money at all, the families really struggle. And there have been some women might have to take up work. There have been some networks of women where like women whose husbands have migrated, like the one that had received money then gave some money to the other women who were still waiting for their husband to get money. I guess it would be interesting to look more in depth, and I assume there are studies that look more in depth at whether these changing roles, whether when the husband returns, whether they change again or whether the woman will be more empowered. But I guess in most cases it's actually that the situation of women becomes worse because they're more under the control of their parents-in-law. On violence based on caste, I guess it's one of those aspects where you have an intersection of caste-based discrimination and gender discrimination and inequalities. And what was quite interesting is that the young people, they also brought up caste-based discrimination as a form of violence. It didn't come out clearly that, okay, and we looked at like it was an area where we had Rai, Limbu and Sherpa communities as well as Brahmin, Chetris and Dalits, for example. Those were like the major communities. And the differences that came out, they weren't that drastic. So which was quite interesting. But like definitely like for so-called lower people from lower caste, generally like their conditions in life were just much more difficult. What wasn't a difference between the so-called alcohol drinking groups, they were perceived as being more aggressive and violent. Whether that is the case, we weren't able to really triangulate that, but there was a perception. The question, how can we come gender inequality? Maybe we can. It's very, very difficult. I guess it has to be really a multi-sectoral approach that needs to take into consideration that the local level situation, the individuals, but then also looking at like employment, looking at particularly if you, for example, look at migration, more like global factors that increase inequality rather than trying to eliminate inequality. So I think was it on the first or second day when people said like, oh, we hope that by 2030 we will have gender equality. I really hope that we do. I'm not quite that optimistic. I think it's a fundamental change, and I think we need to work on many different aspects, and we will need to work on that for a very long time, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay, on the gentleman's question about religious figures, well, I mean, there has been a shift in terms of this kind of politics that we do, that we have begun to engage more with religion, as in to accord it its place, and where necessary. Although obviously many people, part of the alliance, often have individual beliefs which are not so religious, and the people involved with this tradition have historically been secular. But we have resolved that when we're dealing with religious communities, you have to some degree accord some credence to their spirituality. So we do that. We do use examples that pertain to religious and spiritual experience, but at the same time, as far as religious figures themselves go, they are part of usually gatherings, but we don't generally accord them any special importance. Most established religious figures usually already have particular links with other patronage groups, with established elites in society. So often, like, it's not even a question of choice. They often already are allied with other parties, usually other right-wing groups. So in a sense, it's not really practical for us. I mean, to the degree that we try to incorporate them as equals in the process, fine, but not that we go out of our way to consult them on particular issues. And on the question of how to overcome impediments, I mean, very briefly, of course, we can write several theses on these, but I mean, I think it has to do with the question of being able to see power as a complex whole, and to be able to see the operation of power as it exists in various facets of life. Because much of the discourse around gender, it usually takes a form of isolated interventions on particular things, from child marriage to divorce to gender-based violence to sexual violence, etc. And I mean, I think what we need to do is just ensure that understand that people, whether or not people are conscious of it, there are multiple relations of power that affect them, and it makes them act out in certain ways. So what we really need is a new sort of idea of resistance that incorporates all these various facets of aggression. And without that, we'll only be fighting one fire after another.
Thank you. So after we're asking that how all of these problems can be eradicated or we can overcome these kind of problems. So what I think that for a context of my country, what is important, that is a paradigm shift. What kind of, I have found that in Bangladesh, respecting each other culture is totally missed. So what it is important at first, we have to learn that how to respect each other. And I think investing more on the young generation can be sustainable, as we are running towards the sustainable development. So it is important to work with the young people, you know, to sensitize them, which will ultimately bring the gender justice, or you can do some of the good.
We'll move on to the next round of questions. I've seen in like some hands. I'll come to you first.
I have just one question to my colleague from the University of Dhaka. In your focus group,
Yeah.
I saw that in terms of the numbers, you were going to involve 17 and 15 females. I work for the Commission for Gender Equality in South Africa. And some of these inequalities start from the studies like this, where you don't involve women equally as men. So what informed your choice of 17 vis-a-vis 15 females in terms of your podcast groups? Because even there, yeah. So I think that's
okay. That's good. Okay, Sony, and then I'll.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was all the presentation were really very good. But I would like to, for my understanding and clarity, I would like to know more from Nuri. What he has said, I just want to add on it. Like, I know this study is more on, you are looking at development intervention and masculinities in transition it's in Marma men in Bangladesh, in indigenous community. In your study, did you try to look at the women, young girls, adult women perspective or not? So I think that coming into the recommendations, bringing in their perspective is also equally important, because I think masculinities is all about men and women, and coming out with recommendation means like their both perceptions should come in. So I was not that clear. So I would like, for my own clarity, I would like to know more.
Actually, before one more, there is a raise of hand. Yes, sure. Yes.
Yeah, my question is for Julie. Very good presentation. I was very interested to know that did you actually go through the concern of the non-violent men who don't do violence against their wives? And if you get some concern from them, I want to know that what actually have kept them to remain in this non-violent discourse that we are trying to create, that we are calling alternative discourse rather than to remain in the hegemonic discourse. So what actually are the main factors that actually are keeping them to be non-violent and to be a real husband that we are actually trying to establish?
Yes, that's it. There are questions for you, okay?
So as I'm forgetting your name,
Sony.
Yes. You just told that whether I incorporate girls' perception or not. It was a part of my master's, so due to time constraint, that time I couldn't incorporate girls' or women's, perception in it. But now I'm doing another study, and now I'm focusing on Chakma community, which is the biggest, community in the Bangladesh indigenous community. So now what I'm trying, because there is also a power gap between Marma and Chakma also, that when this is the largest one, definitely this is powerful. So I'm trying to do a comparative study where definitely I'm this time, putting women's perception.
So you asked that why, in what basis, basically the number of the FGD members were chosen, right? So conducting FGDs, I've observed that that if it's too large a group, like ideally, it is supposed to take 30 members according to the ideal number, research methodology, or usually it is taken 30 members in a per focus group discussion. But I've heard, I've experienced that if it's too much, at least in our university, too much students actually do. If there's too much students, they don't want to share their message, or the main message that I want to hear actually gets lost if there's too much people, and they're more comfortable. The respondents are more comfortable in a smaller group. So I've chosen to take smaller groups for my focus group discussions. And another thing was the availability of resources. I mean, when they were invited to the focus group discussions, I had to provide them some food, some drinks. So it was not possible for me to create larger groups. And so making the discussion more vibrant, I have chosen little smaller group. And actually I invited 20 boys and 20 girls, but they did not come to the focus group discussions. And I have done the focus group discussion and single sex group and both mixed groups, because sometimes in mixed groups they usually don't want to share their message.
We did talk about why do some men not use violence, and the general perception was that as a young man you don't have to use violence if you can make sure that you can maintain your reputation and honor without using violence. That's totally fine. So we also asked, okay, so how about someone who doesn't want to join a gang? That's fine. That's okay. I think it's very much about individual factors, about friends. Do you have friends who are also non-violent, and do you have other ways to be respected somehow? A lot of the young men were not yet married. So when we talked about marriage, it was often about other couples they saw in the community. A big factor was alcohol abuse, which provokes more domestic violence, and then quite a lot of them refer to actually my parents. They have conversations about those things, but it's very personal story. So it might be also that because there were other friends around them or other people from a similar community that they didn't really come out with that. Very often when no physical violence or shouting was used, it was because the wives were good wives and they were doing what the men said. So it was like the wives fulfilled the expectation in a traditional woman. So but it's something that would be worth looking more into, definitely. Yeah.
We have time to entertain 2 more questions, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to ask the last presenter. You used age as your instrument of creating boundaries among the 3 groups.
Yeah.
How did you control for other variables, such as levels of income, education, issues of disability, class, and so on? 1. 2, you have 3 age groups. And it appears like the opinions are just about the same for each age group. Were there no issues that cut across the board?
Sorry, I don't get it.
Were there no issues that cut across the board among the 3 groups? Because you're saying, if you say 20 to 25, then 26 too. How did I see the 25 and 26? There will be issues that really are common. Those are my issues.
Okay.
One more question.
I have a question for Amar. I think it's really interesting. Your research is really interesting, and I was wondering whether you can elaborate a little bit further on your findings. What kind of factors are involved in shifting the notion of honor towards more acceptance for more participation of women in the public sphere?
last question for the session.
No, I was a question for Nuri. In the responses from each generation, I just noticed that the idea of masculinity from the older generations was focused around protection of society. The second,
the first one is about the masculinity issues. The focus on strong physical structure and
no, but when in the quotes that were there, so as you go from the older generation to the newer one, the quote of the older one was referring to a man's loyalty to or capacity to protect one society, and then the second one, like the next generation, was focused on the family, and then the third one was focused on the individual. So I'm wondering if this is just a case of these quotes, or you found a pattern of an understanding of masculinity related to the social, then more to the family, and then to the individual, or you haven't?
Yes, this is exactly what my finding is, that the first one, they are too much like, that community-based relationship, the like, and it is now going to, that sort of individualism. The second one is doing, because they think, if you emphasize on the first generation, they actually witnessed that their parents used to, both mother and father used to work in the field, and they did also. But the second one, they are witnessing that when Bengali settlers are getting engrossed in this area, a sort of conservatism is happening. They think that yes, women can go out, but if I can earn, I don't need to let them out. I don't need to let them out because, that this is kind of Bengali culture that is actually they are trying to, that incorporate. Third one, that are completely focusing on individualism, because they think that it is not the strong physical structure, rather just the rational thinking through which, that with a minimum input we can get maximum profit. So you were asking me what the first one, you just try to understand age group.
How do you control for other people?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that in that case you need to know about the history of Bangladesh. That it was under the colony rule. It was ruled by the British, and secondly, we were dominated by Pakistani, and then finally, Bangladesh government established after the Liberation War. So I try to understand when in choosing the first generation, I try to understand their perception, because they were the one those witnessed the British rule as well as the Pakistani rule. And I selected the second age group just because to understand that what is their, they witnessed the Pakistani, rule as well as Bangladeshi rule, Bangladesh government rule. So that's why I divided this age group and try to understand their perception.
But the question is this, are these groups homogeneous? If you say from 20 to 25, are you saying they are the same education, the same trust, the same levels of ability?
Actually not, because I focus, I told it earlier, here there is a term called Bandarban Shodor. Shodor, as you can see, what is that Shodor?
What he is saying is that you have 3 age groups, but within those 3 age groups, there might be people who come from different other backgrounds. So whether you have controlled those backgrounds into your education?
Yes, these kind of variables I try to keep in my study, and just let me tell a bit about it. I try to focus on the Bandarban Shodor, which is the city area, not the the rural area. When it is about the city area, there are several kinds of variables, that education or this kind of things. So that's why I basically focused on the city area, Shodor area.
All right, you can carry out.
Okay, we can talk later.
That's what I want to discussion here. Omar,
Hi.
Omar.
Yeah, sure.
Hi.
On the question of how the honor, the definition of honor becomes something more participatory, I think it has to do with a number of factors. I mean, one was, because the situation created the necessity of having women and members of other communities, including Punjabi, Christians, other religious communities, became integral to struggle, and that's how we tried to frame it. When the actual eviction drive was announced, there was a danger that different communities, Pakhtuns and Muslims and Christians, Punjabis, would go their separate ways in resisting it. So what we tried to do was emphasize to them the importance, for one, of interfaith solidarity. So in terms of the message that gives out, that these are not different communities fighting for their sectional interests, but it's something that transcends beyond that. And similar was the case about gender. There's this idea that we emphasize to them that, look, Pashtun men, for instance, they're already demonized by the state as terrorists and as criminals. So we need to show that it's not just men. We need to show that there are women here, that there are children here, and that they're as integral to the struggle. But so all of these factors were important, and the degree to which we use them in our discourse. But I think that this possibility for this change is created at certain moments of rupture, when the state's success becomes very visible and the structures of power become easier to see. Then you can actually intervene in that process, and you should have the means. You should be ready to intervene in such processes in order to be a part of the redefinition of such cultural idioms that takes place during those moments of rupture.
Thank you very much, Amar. With this, this session has come to an end. I think we had a riveting discussion today. Our speakers were talking about different locations, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, but there were a lot of similarities in the issue they were addressing, especially regarding what masculinities are, how they are impacted by tradition, by modernity, how they are transforming, and what are the rules for intervention. So it was a great session. Thank you all the panelists and questions for also very interesting questions we had today about the methodology, about the team, etc. And thank you all for coming here.
Please take a report.
Yes,
their
one
report.
thing, this is the Safer World publication, the institution that has done the research that Judy has presented. There are 3 copies. You're free to